Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. This is the panel Sights and Sounds, Photo Exhibit and Virtual Panel, right? Today we have three presenters, Rashid Hall, Brian Lacier, and in the program we don't have the third speaker, Jarrell Suits. I'm so sorry for that. Um, in this panel, we're going to start talking about a photo exhibit that is taking place. Let me share here. Can you put the slides? Thank you. Thank you. And I do that, and then I will introduce all the panelists, all right? Um, okay. So I'm gonna start by talking about the photo exhibit that is taking place at the Academic Learning Center lobby. If you are on campus and you'd like to see it in person, you can go ahead and go there. It's gonna be there only for today, okay? But you also exhibit the pictures here in this virtual panel, okay? The exhibit is called The Dead Have a Voice, Mothering and Protest, okay? I would like to thank Jocelyn Scamilla, Sandra Rogers, and Deisha Hero for helping me set up this exhibition. I couldn't have done this without them. Thank you so much for the three of you, okay? This photo exhibit aims to showcase the power of mothers demanding justice for their children killed by state agents in Rio de Janeiro. It illustrates how mothers who became activists use their positionality as mothers as a strategic position to raise their voices against the state. The activism of Black mothers has been my research interest since 2008. And throughout these years, I've participated in several protests with them to conduct, to write ethnographic reports, sound recording, collecting documents, and also taking photographs. Although certified in photography, today I am caring less about my photography skills and more about what they inform, the emotions that they can bring and inform. In this presentation, I'm putting into practice the social function that they give to my research, which is to testify and to amplify their voices. Okay, so let me go ahead and show you the pictures. So in this first slide, it's the first slide is called "Against the Dehumanizing this Dehumanization of Black Bodies." You can see two pictures from two events here. Okay, so the first picture is called "Not a Tar Baby." Mothers protesting against the dehumanization of Black bodies using dolls to highlight how their children have been seen in society as just objects, right? And also in the second and third pictures, they create this kind of dolls as well, these mannequins to show and highlight police brutality. Okay. This second slide is called "I Feel Your Pain, I Share Your Pain." You can see here mothers protesting. The mother with the microphone is the mother of Marielle Franco, a consul woman murdered in Rio de Janeiro in 2018. And since then, she has been engaging in different protests against police brutality. Okay. Very quickly, going to the fourth slide, We can see here in the first pictures mothers attending an assembly of deputies in Rio de Janeiro. Their demands were for investigation, but the deputies decided to create a week in recognition of these mothers, and this was really was not their intent. Um, Sometimes they cannot make it, and the second picture in these slides shows Johnayna Soares. Johnayna had a child killed in Rio, and unfortunately, she could not handle the pain and died of sadness, as her family members say. She was traumatized every time she heard fire guns, she would be very ill and affected by that. And one day, during a crossfire in the favela in which she lived, she heard fire guns and had a heart attack and died. All right. Investigate. This is another protest in front of the police station in Rio de Janeiro. You can see here a practice of women and men, fathers and mothers, who protest, and they wear these kind of t-shirts with the picture of their sons and daughters, and they create these signs explaining what happened and denouncing the violence. They need to create counter narratives about what the police reported happening. Okay, defend us. The women also protest and present their demands in front of the public ministry building. The ones responsible for defending them, and but many times they don't investigate, or they don't put their cases forward, and many women died without seeing justice. This slide also showed how women organize to be seen and to be heard, right? So this is to showcase the importance of the media in their protest. They invite the media to see and showcase the assassinations of their sons and daughters. Okay. This picture shows a protest, a performance organized and done by Daisy Carvalho. And in this performance, she talks about the death of her son, and she says that the bullets that killed him and all the violence that he faced killed her as well. So she speaks from this perspective of the dead, and fearless to talk about the violence against her family. In this one, it's also women speaking about the violence. It's very important to them to be together because this is a way for them to empower themselves and to share strength, love, because as they say, only them can feel and can know their feelings. Okay. And finally, super quickly, this is the picture that names this exhibition and the project. The dead have a voice. This is a phrase utilized by many mothers to say that even though their children are dead, they are still speaking through their bodies and through all the denunciation that they do. All right. So this was super quickly. Again, I would like to invite you all to go Uh, Put here. Thank you. I'd like thank you for taking this out. Thank you. Invite you all to go to the physical exhibition, which is located at the Academic Learning Center lobby. With that done, I would like to invite again, the most important people in this panel, our students. I'd like to invite back Rashid Hall, Brian Lacier, and Jarrell Stutz. So students can see them. Can you please put them live? Thank you. Hello, Brian. Hello, Rashid. Let me introduce you to the students. Rashid Hall is a student from our MAST program. Rashid, you present her paper entitled The Mother Drum, Rhythm and Drumming as a Pedagogy of Nurturing and Empowerment. And Brian Lacier, who is also a master student in our program, will present her paper, The Mother of All Massacres, Depictions of the Tulsa Riots in Lovecraft Country. But before them, I would like to let Jarrell to introduce himself through the video. And now we will showcase the video.
Since it began operation in 1906, the NCAA has grown into a behemoth within the entertainment industry with increasing revenues every year. Although the NCAA is so successful financially, there are disparities in the way that money is distributed. In 2019, NCAA Division I alone earned over $15 billion in revenue, with over 50% of that coming from either media rights or government assistance. Of that revenue, 35% goes to coach and administrative compensation, while only 18% is reserved for student-athlete aid. The revenue data is indicative of broader systemic issues which negatively impact student-athletes who, if we're being honest, are the reason the NCAA makes as much money as it does. The NCAA has profited greatly from the exploitation of athletes, with no regard to their development as individuals. Division I student-athletes are generally under immense pressure to perform at a high level, both athletically and academically, and are unable to support themselves financially due to those high demands. In 2021, student-athletes were barred from accepting any compensation that was outside of NCAA aid. In 2021, the Supreme Court ruled in NCAA versus Alston that the NCAA was in violation of antitrust laws and determined that college athletes should be able to profit from their name, image, and likeness, which opened the door for players to sign NIL contracts. The last time steps were taken to better assist athletes was in 2014, when the NCAA approved unlimited snacks and meals for only Division I athletes. Although these changes have been made, not all NCAA athletes are classified Division I, and there are still disparities for compensation because not all athletes will obtain NIL contracts. Aside from individual financial compensation alone, student athletes are also fighting for healthcare protections, equal distribution of funds across all sports, racial equity, including increased scholarships for low-income students, and economic freedom and equity. For example, in 2020, football players from the Pac-12 Conference threatened to boycott the 2020 season, citing many of these same reasons. There have been many other efforts by student-athletes to gain more compensation and protections from the NCAA. In 2015, the Northwestern University football team attempted to unionize, citing concerns over a power structure that marginalized players and issues with long-term health care for student-athletes. Last year, Sedona Prince, a member of the University of Oregon women's basketball team, took to TikTok to expose the disparities between men's and women's training facilities. In the video, the women's weight room included a single rack of dumbbells, while the men's facility was a fully equipped gym. Women's teams also claimed there was major differences in even the food that they were being served. There appears to be a growing trend of student-athletes speaking out against these injustices, which will eventually be increasingly difficult for society and the NCAA to continue to ignore. What is the responsibility of the NCAA? Isn't it the duty of the NCAA to nurture and support their student-athletes, rather than operating like a corporation with their profits relying on the exploitation of those student-athletes? So what's the solution? Is NIL legislation enough? Can we ensure rights and protections for all college athletes? My name is Jarrell Stoltz. Thank you for watching.
Thank you. Unfortunately, Jarrell could not be here with us today, but we are very pleased that he recorded this video to share with us. Jarrell will receive questions. If you have comments or questions, please write later and maybe engage with you. Okay. Now we'll go ahead to Rashid.
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to get my screen going here. All right. And are we good? We can see this. Okay, good. All right. So like she said, I am a student in the math program, and basically, I'm here to talk about music, drumming, rhythm, and how these can be sort of pedagogical tools in order to sort of empower students of color to develop a sense of positive racial identity and subsequently a better sense of self, right? So using the mother instrument, which a lot of us know as the drum, as a way to bridge the gap between students of color and this sort of meaningful educational experience that they have been promised for so long. So I'm going to begin here with a video of an all black, all women percussion band that is from Salvador, Brazil. They're called Bandadita. And I'm just gonna play a short clip here to give you an idea of who these women are, what they do. And as we watch the short clip, I kind of want you to pay attention to their movements, some of the rhythms you're hearing, and just the environment that they're in. I'm sorry. Stop us there. And I just kind of wanted to get a sense of what percussion looks like in these places that in the Atlantic, the African diaspora Atlantic, and just kind of get a good sense of everything that you may absorb. It was a little laggy, but I want you to kind of get an idea for that because we're going to return to that at the end. So again, just to show you guys what we're focusing on, specifically music, specific rhythms as cultural pedagogical tools for students of color. So I'm going to begin with talking about a little bit of why we need this kind of pedagogy, right? So, we've seen upward progress for all students over time in public schools. There still exists a very large achievement gap between African American students and their counterparts, which is kind of obvious when you look at the national data here. And to basically give us a little bit of historical context on how we've reached this point, I usually begin with Brown versus Board of Education. This decision happened in 1954, and when it was decided, African Americans were given the right to attend schools with white students, along with promises of higher academic achievement and equal learning opportunities. Now, this is generally seen as a positive turning point in the American education system for students of color. However, many of these promises have yet to be realized on a national scale. The most striking externality of this decision was the immediate demotions and layoffs of Black educators. When Black schools closed, the loss of revenue in the community was massive. It's estimated that 38,000 educators in 17 states lost their teaching and administrative positions as a result of the decision. Likewise, for African American families, desegregating schools meant enrolling their children into institutions where white dominant culture was the norm. There was a sort of distinct lack of diversity in the classroom, where African American students were no longer taught by teachers who looked like them, but more importantly, teachers who understood them, right? So we fast forward to the 21st century, where many African American students can still complete a K through 12 education without interacting with a teacher of color. That's not to suggest that white teachers could not educate just as well, but this kind of still goes without saying. So even after multiple legislative interventions to provide equality to students of color, they continue to be mistreated and left out of the curriculum. The evidence of racial discrimination has had a negative effect on educational outcomes for African American students. This kind of further intensifies the need for a more sort of responsive pedagogy that goes towards their culture rather than against it, right? So this sort of curriculum that we're hoping for must allow for relevant, engaging, inclusive materials that seek to reach students of color, which includes every learner as well. So before we talk about having a pedagogy of nurturing and empowerment, let's talk about what it means, right? So what it means is to invest in their culture, right? Depending on the subject being taught in the classroom, it means that we as instructors are aware of our students' backgrounds when we curate our classroom material. In order to truly reach our students of color, we have to engage in their culture, their processes of knowledge making, and their lived experiences. When students have material that has a contextual relevance to them, they connect more deeply with the content and, again, become knowledge seekers. African American children who learn their own culture and history see a notable improvement in self-confidence and academic performance. The intentional implementation of African American culture in the curriculum to counter the Eurocentric methods of history, again, has promise for improving the experience of African American students, right? So, finally, we just want to work towards what we call a critically responsive pedagogy, one that basically, takes in multiple perspectives and different paradigms, frameworks, and that we invite all of those into the conversation. We privilege them, we give them weight, right? These are often going to be controversial topics, which African American students may encounter in the style of music that they listen to, right? So this is where we reach the sort of crossroads. How do we do this with music? How do we address this sort of lack of culture and history in the curriculum? And I'm just going to go through a few examples here through the sort of diasporic Atlantic to kind of show us, well, we can add a few more things that have been omitted, right? So the first example I'm going to give is the bomba dance. The bomba originated about 400 years ago on a colonial plantation in Puerto Rico. It's a very popular form of folk music and has really become a form of Afro-Puerto Rican pride. It's lately seen a resurgence with young people trying to sort of keep their culture alive, right? So it usually involves a single female dancer, and this female dancer is in charge, again, which is different. It's a very matriarchal dance where the female, she leads the musicians around her who are sitting in a circle of drums. She dances the rhythms and they are to mimic her rhythms on the drums. So it's kind of a sort of cat and mouse game where she's leading them and they need to follow with the rhythms. So this dance was used to celebrate marriages, baptisms, communicate with each other, even plan rebellions, right? So this dance is very emblematic of Afro-Puerto Rican culture and identity as well. So this is something that we should include in the classroom because Puerto Rico is completely omitted from the American curriculum. It is possible, again, for a student to go from kindergarten to 12th grade without ever knowing the status of Puerto Rico as one of America's most prolific territories, right? So again, giving this little anecdote, giving something that will entice that student population can give them something to see themselves in. And when you see yourself in the curriculum, again, you just perform better. So examining this tradition through a historical lens can kind of help students understand how these traditions come from culture and how it relates to their lived experience. So this is our music as history of culture, right? So moving, focusing really on the U.S. because hip hop is everywhere now, right? Most of the time we see the conversation of hip hop being used in the schools. It's sort of used as sort of a way to bridge the gap from where you see the formal literacy that we enforce in school and sort of the informal that we see students learning at home or through their music, right? So a lot of times teachers will, have students analyze lyrics and maybe in a sort of like a language arts kind of way, sort of analyze what they're saying. And others are basically using this as an art form itself where kids sort of create their own music. Their hip hop is the vessel through which they can create this conversation. And through this, we can validate the students. We can validate their lived experiences. And again, kind of talk to their beliefs about racism instead of, blocking it, right? It gives us that context for teachers to create these situations, right? These situations play a central part in the classroom. And it basically sort of captures the struggle of people who have been left out of the American dream. People who, in the words of Malcolm X, are the victims of Americanism. So finally, I want to circle back to the Bandadita. I want to finish back where we started. This Black all-woman band of drummers is a response to the extreme lack of women in the percussion world. They've taken their chance to participate in their culture, just like the men have always had the chance for. So their existence, their outreach, their visibility simultaneously validates that of the Black Brazilian woman. And in a place where Black bodies are judged, ridiculed, they move with a particular kind of freedom that comes from knowing that in certain spaces, you can move as you please, you can exist as you please, react as you please, and your Black life will still have value. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak, and I'm going to cede my time there. I appreciate you listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Jarrell, for this amazing presentation. Now I would like to invite Brian Lacier.
Hello, everyone. My name, as Dr. Rocha said, my name is Brian. I'm also a graduate student in the master program, and my presentation is on the Tulsa, Oklahoma race massacre and the depictions of it in both Lovecraft Country and The Watchmen. I just need to bring the presentation up. If we can go back to the first slide, I can do that. So to start off my presentation, I wanted to show a brief clip from the opening episode of The Watchmen, which premiered on October 20th, 2019. For many people, when that episode of the TV show The Watchmen premiered, they had never heard of the Tulsa, Oklahoma race massacre. People took to Twitter after its premiere, talking about the incredible violence displayed in the clip. And many thought that it was just a alternative history that had its violence increased in order to fit the theme of the show. Well, that just isn't true. On May 31st, 1921, the afternoon paper, the Tulsa Tribune, published a story whose headline is in the slide that I won't repeat, which implicated a man named Diamond Dick Rowland, who was an African-American delivery man, in assaulting a 17-year-old white girl named Sarah Page in the elevator of the Drexel building in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The article used specific fabricated language, which the editor of the paper later admitted to including in the story in order to create it, to make it more sensationalized. In that language, Rowland was accused of ripping the clothes off of young Sarah Page. In the language of 1921, the Tulsa Tribune had just accused Dick Rowland of attempted rape of a white woman. The NAACP, in their article on the history of lynching, says, a common claim used to lynch black men was a perceived sexual transgression against white women, and these charges of rape were routinely fabricated. Even though the Tulsa Tribune had a firm anti-lynching stance both before and after the article, the fabricated language and sensationalized story had only one outcome. So, Dick Rowland was arrested by the Tulsa police force and moved from the city jail to the county jail for his own protection. By 9:30 p.m., 2,000 white men had created a mob outside of the county jail. Refusing to disarm or disperse by order of the county sheriff, they called for Dick Rowland's immediate release so that he could be lynched. 75 African-American men arrived to defend Mr. Rowland. They intermingled with the white crowd, and when the whites began to demand the African-American men disarm and disperse, they refused. The white men tried to disarm one man, causing a gun to discharge into the air. The Tulsa sheriff, McCullough, described this event that followed as all hell breaking loose. An eyewitness who was not named claimed that the African-American men began to fire into the mass of white men in order to cause death and violence. However, from hospital records, only one person was treated for a wound from this altercation, and it was not a white man, it was an African-American man. After this brief exchange of gunfire, the African-American men retreated to what is known as the Greenwood neighborhood in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The white mob, which had now grown to 10,000, met, strategized, armed themselves, and descended upon the Greenwood neighborhood. And what followed is probably the most violent single-day racially motivated bout of violence in American history. So I want to talk about storytelling in history, because at the heart of my presentation and paper, it is about authors of color using speculative fiction to tell their history. And storytelling and history have long been intertwined. Storytelling is a rich oral tradition among humans, and for many oppressed people and cultures, storytelling plays a key factor in both the cultural and historical memory that they are able to maintain of their people. It is a means by which these groups are taught their own history and not the state-sponsored history of the oppressor. In the United States, this is the Anglo-centric historical narrative that we are taught of the great white men of history. For many people, storytelling in the oral tradition serves as a means of resisting this oppression and a way to heal trauma for the oppressed people. Speculative fiction as a form was widely agreed upon to have begun in literary form in Mary Shelley's 1818 novel Frankenstein. However, historians of fantasy and speculative fiction, as well as literary critics, all agree that this form of storytelling has existed in the oral tradition in virtually every culture far or earlier. The Greek mythos, for one example, is fantasy fiction. And the themes present in speculative fiction novels have close ties to that of African American literature. Themes of religion, the supernatural, the human condition, and morality are among these themes that the two styles of fiction closely share. So it is natural in one's thinking that speculative fiction and its capacity for storytelling would be ready and willing to tell African American stories and other authors of color to share in novel form. However, that is not true. From 1818 to the 1960s, fantasy and futurist fiction was widely white and Anglo. The Black futurist fiction and fantasy movement, a term coined in the Futurist Fiction and Fantasy, the Racial Establishment, a paper by Gregory Rutledge, grew out of 1960s movement for civil rights and racial equality. Fiction at the time was starved for both African American authors and characters. In speculative fiction, there remained this thought that the wider audience would not be able to relate to characters of color. So often the stories and struggles of those that were applied traditionally from African American stories were applied to white characters. That changed with the man on the slide now, Samuel R Delaney Jr. He is widely known as the grandfather of Black futurist fiction and fantasy. He won the Nebula Award, which is a yearly award for excellence in science fiction, 2 years in a row, when 1966 is Babel 17, and again in 1967 for his novel, The Einstein Intersection. His influence and success in the speculative fiction genre caused more authors of color to join the genre and more publishers to take chances on authors of color. What came out of this was a flourishing literary genre known as Afrofuturism. There is a quote here by Afrofuturist author Octavia Butler that says, "When I began writing science fiction, when I began reading, I wasn't in any of this stuff that I read. So I wrote myself in since I'm here and I'm the one writing." Her book, Parable of the Sower, is a giant of Afrofuturism. A more modern example and one of the most successful Marvel films is The Black Panther, is also Afrofuturism. This style of fiction, both literary and visually, has a rich color palette and heavy use of African iconography. Another popular Afrofuturist set of short stories is called How Long Till Black History Month by N.K. Jemisin. She also has won 3 Hugo Awards for a series of novels, which is a yearly award for fantasy fiction. Afrofuturism is defined by the UCLA as the story of musicians, artists, writers, philosophers, fashion icons, filmmakers, costume and set designers, actors, activists, and academics who believe in a better future for Black people and for all people. So what does speculative fiction Afrofuturism have to do with Tulsa, Oklahoma, Lovecraft Country, or The Watchmen? Well, quite a lot. Afrofuturism and Black fantasy fiction in general have often looked towards the future or towards secondary worlds to tell stories of racial trauma. But in a recent movement has been to set these stories in our world and our history of the United States, and to show how these real world stories can be told. The author on the screen is P. Djeli Clark, who wrote the novel Ring Shout, which is the cover on the left side of the screen. When speaking on the power of speculative fiction to tell anti-colonialism and anti-racist stories, he said, "One of the ways speculative fiction can work against racism and colonization is to reimagine our past, altering the power dynamics that we are accustomed to in order to illuminate hidden histories and silence voices." And he did this with his novel Ring Shout, which tells the story of a group of demon hunters who hunt what is called Ku Kluxes. And the Ku Kluxes control, as you might guess, the Ku Klux Klan. And only African Americans can see the Ku Kluxes for what they really are, this interdimensional force that feeds on hatred. Both the Watchmen TV show and the Lovecraft Country TV show seek to aim to do similar work. They work against the foundational power dynamics of race and colonization in order to provide stories and show history that is often forgotten and give volume to the voices who have been silenced for so long. Lovecraft Country especially focuses on the trials and tribulations of an entire family as they work through the Jim Crow era of the United States, while The Watchmen focuses on an alternative future where descendants of the Tulsa race massacre are offered reparations called redferations and the change in power dynamics that come with it, as well as the deep-seated racial oppressive systems that would still exist in such a world and how the characters of that world navigate it. We have seen the opening of the Watchmen TV show with the depiction of the Tulsa race massacre, and is a deliberate and poignant take on the themes of the one season show. As the show deals with issues of alt-right extremism, closeted racism, and systematic oppression. The show's themes serve as a warning to the greater historical narrative of the United States and those in charge that those ignored and forgotten history will not stay buried for long, and everything will come to the surface eventually, and the truth will be set free. So that leads to the question is, do these depictions of historical events in speculative fiction actually achieve anything? And I argue that they do a lot. After the premiere of the HBO's The Watchmen, the very scene that we watched at the beginning, the Oklahoma State school curriculum introduced legislation to teach the Tulsa Race Massacre in Oklahoma public schools. Before this, it was not taught. As Oklahoma Senator Kevin Matthews said, the Race Massacre was Tulsa's dirty little secret. Well, it is a secret no longer. We will end with a depiction of the Tulsa, Oklahoma Race Massacre in Lovecraft country. Thank you for listening to my presentation.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Brian and Rashid, for your presentations. Your work made me remember the work of Mamie Marable, an important Black scholar who talks about aspects of Black studies. And I can see your work engaging with the three aspects that they talk about. The first one is that Black studies is descriptive. It is spoken from the perspective of Black people, analysis from the perspective of Black people, right? The second one is that it is corrective and critical. It is meant to educate the miseducated of every racial group about the Black experience and the challenges. And finally, he says that Black studies is prescriptive, right? So it is theorized and offer strategies and propose tactics for the eradication of racism. And as I said, I can see these three aspects being presented in your work when you talk in the three words, when Jarrell creates the video talking about the the NCAA and all, and how they are profiting from the players, right? So it's announcing what is going on. When Rashid talks about Bandadida and all the erasure, how we are disconnected with our traditions, and how the schools don't make the case for us to engage with our traditions, which would allow the students to learn better, to know and to connect with the rhythm that will allow them to learn better. Or when Brian talk about present the video and also talk about Afrofuturism that creates this space for us to imagine new possibilities, right? And to see also things from another perspective. So it was really interesting. And I'd like to ask the first question for you. I'd like to ask about your motivations. What made you select this topic, and how you see your work engaging with Black scholarship?
Do you want to go for it, or I'll go? I guess I'll go first. Um, so I um, grew up in school. I was in band. I was trained as a percussionist. I guess I still consider myself a percussionist. Um, and so I kind of took that with me through school. And then my undergrad, I studied history. My major was history. So I kind of have those two, like social studies and music, together as like very strong interests. And what I'm finding, again, as a teacher, as you can see, I'm sitting in my classroom. As a teacher, um, I want to look back and say, what was it that sparked me? Why did I enjoy school? What was something that clicked for me? And that was when I actually went to college and took my first African Diaspora class. And I learned a little bit about myself, because the K-12 curriculum here in Georgia, I mean, again, there's less than 4 or 5 mentions of African or African American culture specifically. So unless you add that in specifically and feel that that's important, again, kids don't have that. So I'm like, well, what will it take to show these children who they are, how to motivate them? And that's kind of like, music is what got me, right? Putting that together of like, oh, this is the same. Watching the bomba in Puerto Rico, watching that extremely West African dance was like, oh, that got me. Watching people in Brazil with my skin color, with my hairstyle, they just speak Portuguese, but they play the drums the same. And it kind of connects it all for me in a way of like, wow, I'm so interested in this. And so my hope is that this work will go to other teachers and help them figure out how to get our lowest performing students engaged in the material. So that's kind of like how I got into it.
Um, Much like Rashid, when I went to high school, I learned the great white man of history narrative. As a white person, the woman who raised me, my grandmother, is Afro-Puerto Rican. So when I was learning history, I learned a lot about men who looked like me, but I didn't learn a lot about people who looked like my family. So when I went to college and I learned more about the African diaspora and the history of oppressed peoples in America, I wanted to learn more. And I dived headfirst in. I love fantasy and speculative fiction, and I thought it was a very powerful tool to tell stories of oppressed people. The more I found in those veins, the more I read of them. And when The Watchmen and Lovecraft Country came out, I thought they were such powerful TV shows. And even though critically they weren't acclaimed, but the stories they told and the way they told them and how much people didn't know these stories, I found really powerful. So I wanted to look at the history of storytelling and how oppressed peoples use storytelling to tell their own history. And that's how my project came about.
Thank you. Thank you. My second question is about method. I would like to know, how are you developing your project? What sources, material, the path you are doing to create your work?
So because I have this history background, that's kind of what I lean on mostly. I look in history journals. I look at authors that again I recognize using the history method. Something that's been kind of new for me for this project, because I actually have not written about music a lot. I read about it, I listen to it, but I haven't written about music a lot. So one of the new things for me is looking through sources in an ethnomusicology sense. And that is something that reading someone else writing about music is honestly a bit mystifying, you know. It's something that, like, when I'm reading, I kind of have to click another tab and open up YouTube and hear it myself, because even when someone is just like given such good imagery and the narrative is there, I got to hear it myself. So again, I'm finding out on my own, like, okay, how can I put this into words? How can I put, you know, instead of saying culture and style 800 times, how do I put, you know, these musical terms to good use, right? And kind of mesh it with that history method. And that's kind of like where that's where I feel like I'm coming from that angle. I kind of mesh those two together and get this product.
Like Rashid, I also have an undergrad in history, so I definitely started coming at things from a historical perspective. But another thing that I really like is reading. Like I said, I love fantasy and speculative fiction, and I also love film. So that was also something that I really look forward to in joining the master program, is the ability to bring in these other methods into my research instead of just historical methods, like literary criticisms and film criticism, and the way to look at those in combination with history and how these things tell stories. So I've been reading a lot of books on literary criticism. I continue to read African American authors and specific stories. Ring Shout, like I mentioned in my presentation, another book I've read recently is The Ballad of Black Tom, and these are all stories that attack racial prejudices in America. So just reading these stories, reading literary criticisms about how they craft these stories to tell the themes that they want, and combining it with the real world, you know, history that is often untaught. Is how I've kind of been going about it.
Thank you. Let me see if we have any questions from the audience. I've been seeing that we have several students participating. People liked your presentation. Fabulous. Thank you. Wonderful presentations to all of you. I can see a lot of reactions here, but we don't have uh, questions. We don't have questions. So I'd like to ask if you have questions or comments to each other.
Yeah. So your paper, Rashid, is obviously about drumming and music. So like, what? I also love music. So what are some of your favorite artists?
Oh, put me on the spot. So I grew up on hip hop. Right now, I've been going through, because hip hop is a big part of my paper. I've been going back through like starting at the beginning. I'm really getting back into a lot of. I like hip hop. When I do my work, which is most of the time, I'm sitting and I'm like, I've been getting into some like electronic weird stuff that I, again, don't think I've normally liked, but you know, just going down the music rabbit hole, you find a lot of stuff. Um, I like I like jazz. I didn't realize how much I like jazz, um, and not just like someone screaming on a saxophone jazz, but just like something that can make you sit and think and relax. So that's kind of like my home base: hip hop, jazz, very American style of music. So just I've been kind of like branching my horizons with this project and listening to some things that I maybe wouldn't have put on myself without it. So yeah, I'm into that, man.
Yeah, that's really cool. When you talked about the Puerto Rican dancing, it reminded me like the music my grandmother would play when I was a kid in the house, and it's very rhythm based. almost like the drum was the main, the main event of the song, and everything else just added to it because the drum provided the rhythm that you dance to. So it really reminded me of that.
Mhm. Great. So we do have a question here from JM Dreamer. Who was the person who created Black futuristic fantasy?
Well, with things like that, depending who you ask, you'll get different answers. But the one who popularized it was Samuel R. Delaney Jr. He did win the Nebula Award, like I said, in 1966 and 1967, which are now major awards in the speculative fiction genre. Every year, there's a big conference that's held different places in the world called the Hugo Awards and the Nebula Awards. They're kind of combined now. And they give out these awards to science fiction authors. And he was the first author of color to win one of these awards. And he didn't win it once, he won it twice in 2 years in a row.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Brian. I'd like you to write down the name in our private chat so we can broadcast to everyone as well. All right. So if we don't have any more questions, I would like to wrap up this panel by thanking Rashid, Brian, and Jarrell for these wonderful presentations. I hope that our students watching this can be inspired to continuously engage with Black scholarship, apply to our programs, take our classes, because you can see that we can analyze so many topics engaging with Black scholarship. This was just a sample of it, and we have amazing students doing amazing work. Thank you very much, Rashid, Brian, and Jarrell, for your presentation. All right. Thank you. So let me see if we have the name. Oh, you didn't say the name. Okay.
I put it in. I don't have access to the comment stream, so I put it in our. There it is.
Okay, Brian, let me just, okay, it's already there. Thank you. So our audience can be informed and learn from us. Okay, so thank you. We have another panel to we have two other panels to finish this conference. This has been a long and very informative day. So our next section starts at 6:30 p.m. and it's going to be the KSU Student Town Hall. How can we help KSU provide a more nurturing environment to people of color students? Okay, so please join us, and thank you for coming. Bye.